Welcome to the official Lawyer Minds podcast. Lawyer Minds is an ever-growing ecosystem for all the resources modern lawyers need. As the official Lawyer Minds podcast, we'll discuss everything from the latest happenings on the website to industry news. Get ready. Here we go. It's time to dive into the minds of successful lawyers. Here are your hosts, Tad Thomas and Mike Campbell.
Mike, good to see you. Springtime.
Yeah, it's getting there. It's a little cold here, but we're getting there, man.
Yeah. Hot and heavy with trials. I got a trial coming up in May. I got a trial coming up in June.
Yep.
Time to roll up sleeves.
You have a few things in the hopper. Got a few irons in the fire. Your presidency's in full swing. I mean, you are in the home stretch here?
I think I'm lame duck now. I have four months left. I'm lame duck at this point.
Lame duck. Yeah. Okay. I'm sure that's the case. Linda, I hope, doesn't listen to this. I'm not sure that she would agree with that, but
yeah. Well, there's going to be a lot of reasons that we hope that Linda doesn't listen to this one until after I'm done being presidency, because I have a feeling there's going to be some stories come out that they may not let me talk to the press anymore after they hear this podcast.
And so, yeah, I know what the podcast is going to be about. And so I just have a question for you. Have you ever had an experience with talking with the press about a legal case that you may want to share, may not want to share?
Well, yeah, I told you I knew that was going to come up. There may have been a couple of incidents. And I think incident is probably the appropriate word. The first time, I guess it's probably the statute of limitations is run, and the governor's no longer the governor, and the AG is no longer the AG.
That's right.
Yeah. So I had one case where I was in court on behalf of the Attorney General's office, commenting to the press about how time for negotiations was over and the case had been submitted at the same time. Above my pay grade, there were conversations going on about how to resolve the case. So that was one. And the one that got me banned from talking to the press for the rest of my career in the government was when I got a call on a Friday afternoon from what I thought was a newspaper reporter and talked off the record for a while. And then they asked me to give a statement about a very politically sensitive case that was occurring. I didn't realize how politically sensitive it was. I gave a statement to what I thought was a newspaper reporter. Turned out not to be a newspaper reporter. Turned out to be the radio host for a 500 station syndicated radio broadcast that ran over the weekend. And so our communications director showed up on Monday at my door and was not very happy with me. And that was the end of my stint giving comments to the press. So,
yeah.
So good thing we have people like Ray, who we're going to interview today, who will be able to talk to us about how you're supposed to talk to the press.
That's right. You got to hire a professional. I mean, people hire us. I always think of that "you can do it cheaper" picture, and it's like of the Mona Lisa, like of a kid with crowns, and it doesn't look great. And we think we are pretty sharp when it comes to making statements, because we get paid by the spoken word sometimes, but we're not. Guys like Ray are. Yep.
And I met Ray from RebuttalPR through AAJ, where he worked a while back running communications, who's now kind of developed a niche doing PR for plaintiffs' side cases and telling the stories of our clients. So really looking forward to Ray's advice and counsel. So
great.
Without further ado, Ray DeLorenzi, RebuttalPR. The Lawyer Minds podcast brought to you by Gavel Video. Some companies do videography, but Gavel Video does high-quality cinematography to highlight your firm's successes. Also brought to you by Legal Insights, providing expert digital marketing for law firms. And finally, brought to you by iLitigate, trial presentation software for trial lawyers by trial lawyers. And now to our program. Ray, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Going well. Good to see you, Tad and Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. Well, let's start. Why don't you tell us a little bit about RebuttalPR and how you got into the business and what you do?
Sure. So Rebuttal is a PR and communications firm that specializes in working with the plaintiffs' bar on supporting their litigation in the media and supporting their law firm in the media as well. And, elevating their presence, whether it's in their specific geography or practice area they focus on. How I got involved in this was, it feels like, an era ago, but I worked at AAJ and I ran their communication shop for a few years. And AAJ, which is obviously, Tad, as you know, a tremendous organization, and you're doing a tremendous job leading it this year. I got to know a lot of folks in the plaintiffs' bar. And I fell in love with the work and telling the stories of the people that trial lawyers represent and how, the civil justice system and the importance of that system and holding wrongdoers accountable. So through that work is how I got to know a lot of plaintiffs lawyers, and I got into doing this work.
And so what kind of work do you do as far as, I'm a law firm, I need help. Let's say I've got a big case. Let's say for the sake of argument, there's a train derailment in a state that we'll call Missouri, Ohio. And I've got, 50 clients there. What kind of work would you do for me? Yeah,
you know what? The short answer is depends, and I will give the long answer. But, we always start with is, what's the goal here? And, I'm not a big advocate of, getting someone, in the media for the sake of getting them in the media. And we got to be looking towards, a broader goal. Maybe in a case like that lawyer is looking to elevate their expertise publicly so that people in that community know who to call if they need legal representation. That may be at the early stages, really pre-litigation. But let's say we're in the course of litigation, you often see, corporate defendants, especially big ones, let's say that may be responsible for a train derailment that's been the subject of national news coverage, that they're trying to insert their perspective into the into news coverage, which may not actually reflect the circumstances on the ground or the circumstances of what people in that community are going through. And I think it's a dangerous place to be when you're letting, just the defendant, get their perspective, and the side of the individual who's been harmed is not reflected. And what we would do is try to make sure that that perspective of the lawyers, but more importantly, their clients, is reflected in the media. So again, I think it's very circumstantial. It just depends on where we are at in a case. But I think that's a good lesson just, generally is, before engaging with the media, is thinking about like, what are we doing here? What do we need to accomplish? And that sort of everything flows from there.
So like, let's say I've got a case that happens to be newsworthy. I get called up by a news reporter. What, I guess, number one, what are some common mistakes that attorneys make when reporters call us up all the time and sometimes we just spout off? What are some of the mistakes we make?
I think, using that circumstance, I think the first mistake is answering the questions right in that phone call. It's there's nothing against saying, hey, I'm tied up right now. Can I get back to you in 30 minutes? And then take some time to reflect on, what's happening in the case. What do you want to get across? I think trying to do that in real time is a bit dangerous. Like, let's say you're in the middle of working on something else, and then you're kind of having to pivot and answer, reporters' questions, and by default, you're on the record. Taking 30 minutes to reflect and think through what exactly you want to say, I think, is critical. It's pretty much mandatory, and it's a very common mistake. I think second, and related to that, is in a litigation context, first rule is do no harm. And it depends on where you're at in a case, but you have a variety of stakeholders that you need to consider. You need to consider your client's perspective. You need to think of the court's perspective. Let's say you're in trying to resolve the case. What's the defendant's perspective going to be if you're speaking about the case when you may be, close to resolving it? So I think you have to think through all those. And, there's not, necessarily a checklist. It's more art than science. But I do think taking the time to do that and not sort of shooting from the hip is really important.
What about, what's useful for a reporter? Like when they're calling me up, they have a goal. They need to have an article that, is clickbait or, gets attention, but on the same token, I want to be helpful. I want to get my client's story out. What can we do to be helpful to the reporters without, stepping on our own toes?
Yeah. I think one sort of key lesson here is that there are multiple ways you can interact with a reporter that aren't necessarily you just speaking on the record and allow you to be helpful. Again, while a reporter comes in with their own goal, you have to think about what's your goal. And those may not match all the time. But I understand from a relationship perspective, you also want to be helpful. So, a way to think about it is sometimes just, giving a quote and providing information on the record is a way to go. But sometimes maybe you don't want to be seen as speaking on the record. And instead you can point the reporter to a publicly available legal filing that answers the questions they have. And then you're not necessarily being quoted in a way that could be detrimental to your case. Sometimes it's just speaking off the record. And again, it's important to ask permission from the reporter. You can't just assume they're okay with that guideline or that restriction. But again, it's a lot of, especially for local reporters, a lot of this is relationship driven. You want to be helpful to that person, but also you have to understand what your own goal is and make sure those things match up. But I think setting those ground rules, and I think it's also underappreciated, the fact that a lot of things that you may be reluctant to say on the record are things you probably have said in a legal filing, and just giving that legal filing to the reporter and saying, here, use this, is a way to, sort of accomplish your goal while also being helpful to the reporter.
I think one of the things that I've seen too in recent litigation strategy and some of the cases that we have as defendants finding novel ways to bring counterclaims against our clients or things like that. But you see this in your space as well, right? That there are litigation strategies, especially in these big cases, and then there are public relations strategies. Yeah. What are some of the things that you see in your space that we should be thinking about as well in that regard?
Yeah, Mike, I think you bring up a good point where I think in many cases, the higher profile ones, particularly, you're seeing defendants, try to, levy, defamation claims. And they really do this as an intimidation tactic. And I think it's something, again, it's very circumstantial to the case. But if you make a allegation in a legal filing, I think that's, something that's fair game to share with a reporter. But I think, you have to think about it from your client's perspective first, and sort of that do no harm principle. And if you feel like there's a risk there, well, is that risk worth taking? And I think, again, it's very circumstantial. But I do think that is something, Mike, we're seeing more with defendants, going that defamation route. Second is we're seeing more, more big corporate defendants. They won't necessarily defend themselves, but they'll try to use front groups or trade associations to defend themselves. And, you can pretty easily follow the money and say, hey, this trade group, gets, a significant amount of funding from that defendant. But they'll have the trade group or front group do a lot of the dirty work for the defendant. And they'll do that in a couple of ways. One is sort of defending the specific allegations that may be in one complaint. Two is they'll try to cast doubt on that cause of action generally. And third, tied to that, is then they try to go seek legislative relief in a lot of these big cases. So, and again, it won't necessarily be that specific defendant, doing it in their name, but using other parties to carry the water.
Let's say I've got a case. Obviously, if I have a really large case, we want them to hire RebuttalPR to approach the media. But, let's say I've got a smaller case that, for whatever reason, I think a reporter might be interested in locally. How would a lawyer go about appropriately approaching, a reporter?
Yeah. Again, it's very circumstantial. I hate giving the answer. It depends, but it does. Yeah. But let's say, it's a case a reporter could be interested in. I am very much a proponent of not blasting something out to the whole universe and being strategic and finding who is the person that could care most about this. And, I think while everyone, believes a New York Times front page story is sort of the golden ticket, so to speak. having a piece in a local paper or on a local TV outlet, depending on the defendant, could actually have more impact. So you have to think about the audience you're trying to reach. And sometimes it's, a community. Sometimes it's a one person, it could be the judge. Sometimes it could be, the judge and the clerks and the defendant and send the message. It just really depends. But I think you need to start again with, what am I trying to accomplish here? Who am I trying to reach? And work from there. I do think, let's say it's a smaller case and, it's sort of like a case specific in a community. Doing a little research and saying, hey, is there a reporter in this area that cares about these sorts of issues? Let's say it's like a nursing home case, someone who's covered issues of nursing home neglect, nursing home abuses in the past in that area. That could be a place to start. I think finding that one reporter that cares about it and, giving them that exclusive, oftentimes that one story can carry a much bigger punch than sending it to a bunch of different people and hoping someone picks it up. So again, I think it really starts with, hey, what do I want to accomplish here? Who do I want to reach? And then, doing a little research on finding who that individual is that really could care the most about it.
So what's your passion? What are your favorite types of cases to work on?
Oh, you know what? I always find something in every case that gets me interested. And, sometimes it could be, the plaintiff, they just have such a compelling story and you always want to do right, by these people. They've been harmed or injured through no fault of their own. But sometimes, as a lawyer, you could speak to this. There's always certain cases that pull at you more. And working on those sorts of cases, that's one thing. On the flip side, sometimes we're up against the defendant that their conduct is just so abhorrent and their attitude in response is just so infuriating that, you want to, that is what the motivation is. At the end of the day, though, I like tricky problems. I like ones that involve sophisticated litigation and sophisticated parties. And again, it's always a challenge. And I know, I think some lawyers are like, just give me the slam dunk cases. And then there's really good lawyers who don't mind the slam dunk case, but they take on cases that other lawyers may turn down because they feel like, sort of intractable problems. And those are the ones I'd like to get involved in the most.
Great. So how do we reach out to you if somebody, says, hey, I've heard Ray and I've got this case, I'm interested in talking to him. How do they find you?
Well, thanks, Tad, for putting the ball on a tee and letting me put in a plug here. Best spot is RebuttalPR.com. Find out all about our firm. And you can reach out to me at Ray at RebuttalPR.com. But we are very fortunate to do work for some of the best in the plaintiff's bar. Work on some of the most high stakes cases. So it's exciting work. There's always a challenge, and it's really a privilege to be in the mix on some of these cases that are really like, once in a generation type cases that not only you're trying to do right by the clients, but they also can drive social change at the same time. That's really important.
So I'm going to give you another softball question before we close, since, every softball question has a payment to be made. So your payment is the answer to this softball question. Who's the AAJ president you've most enjoyed working with from a standpoint of being able to communicate with the press?
Tad Thomas. I mean, no question. Tad Thomas, greatest AAJ president of my life.
Ray, that was not a fishing expedition. Ray, you don't need to say that.
Yeah. If any future AAJ president has a podcast and asks that question, I'm not going to promise I won't give a different answer. But yeah. So, but for today.
This is deep fake audio, just so we're clear. This is deep fake audio.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing all kinds of fun stuff.
No, AJ has been very lucky to have you as president, Tad. That's no BS, and you've done a tremendous job, and I know you're finishing strong here over the next few months.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it, Ray.
Yeah.
All right. That's Ray DeLorenzi.
Thank you, Tad. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Ray.
So, like I said, I probably needed Ray's lessons years ago before I started talking to the press.
Great thing is that we can take the mistakes we make and make them lessons for other people. So, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
He's got such a great practice, and it's so important. We as trial lawyers have to tell our client stories, and we're really good telling those stories within the four walls of the courtroom. It's a little bit different when you're telling the story and you're not governed by the rules of evidence or the rules of civil procedure. And, it's a whole different animal to be doing press conferences and to have a newsworthy case where reporters are calling you.
That's right. And it's important because even though we aren't governed by those things, we still have, we're governed by specific rules about our practice. And so, for anyone listening to this, if you decide you want to do some PR stuff, make sure that you check in. Okay, what are my ethical obligations when it comes to talking about this specific case? Each jurisdiction differs. It's hard to say. But, if you've got a case that you think, hey, this is going to draw some national attention, Ray would be the guy to talk to about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Mike. And till next time, huh?
Sounds good.
All right.
That wraps another episode of the official Lawyer Minds podcast. Please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Explore the other content Lawyer Minds has to offer and engage with us on social media. Your feedback on the show and ideas for future shows is always welcomed. See you next time.